All right, today we're going to be diving into the SEC, the battle that is happening within our ranks in DC with senators and all sorts of things happening around the regulatory front. We'll dive in deep. My name is Paul Barron. Welcome back into Tech Path. If you guys are following us around the topic of not only regulation, what's happening within the ETF wars, so to speak, with the SEC and all of the filers of trying to get ETFs across the line, today's going to be a good episode. You won't want to miss it. So we'll dive in a little bit deep. I've got a guest here today, Cody Carbone, who's the VP of Policy over at the Chamber of Digital Commerce. Great to have you on the show.
Thanks so much for having me. Great to be here.
Cody, so first of all, just to give our audience a little bit of framework around the Chamber of Digital Commerce, what is your main mission right now, and how are you guys involved with blockchain, crypto, et cetera?
Yeah, so our main mission is advocating for the use of blockchain technology and digital assets. And so what we do and what we've been doing since 2014 is advocating for companies in this space in Washington for clear and common sense rules and regulations. So we are on the ground every single day with members of Congress on Capitol Hill, with the regulatory agencies advocating for our companies in this space.
All right, so that's good because we need all of you guys that we can get right now in DC, because it feels like we're on a misinformation war right now, especially with this recent article out by the Wall Street Journal, obviously kind of connecting crypto to tariffs and now being proven otherwise. But you have a very interesting scenario playing out right now with Senator Warren. And I was looking at a tweet you put up, "Facts will always prevail." Thank you. This was Morgan Stein and Jason Last for setting the record straight. And this was really about the fact that Senator Warren got it wrong, the Wall Street Journal got it wrong, but yet at the same time, we're not seeing either one of them admit to their wrongdoing. First of all, how can they do that is my question to you.
This is rinse and repeat for them. This is the same old tactics that Senator Warren and members of her anti-crypto army have been doing for years. And they will find a crisis and they will find a way to spin the facts to push their own anti-crypto agenda where it will be negative towards crypto. And that's exactly what's happening with Hamas. And if it wasn't Hamas, it would be North Korea using Bitcoin. And so they take these narratives, they find the simplest or smallest tie to cryptocurrency, and they say it is the entire problem. And the way that they're able to get away with it is that there are so many uneducated members of Congress who hear the headline, Hamas is using cryptocurrency to fund all of their efforts. If you're a member of Congress and you don't know anything about crypto, you don't know anything about blockchain technology, you're immediately going, whoa, I don't want any part of this. Let's stop this. And so the senator from Massachusetts is an extremely effective lobbyer. And so she has been able, and communicator, and she's been able to use her platform to tie these crises to digital assets and push her agenda. And that's what's unveiling over the last few weeks.
Yeah, Cody, let me ask you this, because I look at it from, we've become, I feel like, experts analyzing the senators and Congress people out there, lawmakers really in general, over the past year. And there's a very interesting narrative that has started to appear. You have the pro-crypto, obviously, if you go to Stand with Crypto with the Coinbase guys, we've talked to them many times about this. They do a great job of at least kind of giving you a little bit of framework around what policymakers think of blockchain and crypto in general in terms of their stance. But here's my question to you. Senator Warren has a handful of very specific lawmakers in place. Who are they? Who are the ones that we would need to focus on, from a sense of letting our audience go out and try to help educate these people?
They're what I like to call the blank slate lawmakers, which means when you ask them about blockchain technology, you ask them about digital assets, blank slate. They have no idea what you're talking about. You go in there and it goes right over their head. And so this is a coalition that has been growing over the last few weeks and months and even years that Senator Warren has been able to tap into that lack of education. Most of these members happen to be on the Democratic aisle, where Senator Warren is most effective in using her microphone, using her platform, and advocating for her own agenda, and to go into those offices that she knows are not as educated and to convince them that this is the right way forward. that we must not only address and regulate digital assets, because we've been advocating for that and we would welcome that through regulation and legal clarity, but we must eradicate it from the United States. That is the
Yeah.
message that she has put forth. And that is where she's going after these blank slate members, these members that if you went to their public profiles or you looked at their campaigns, they probably never mentioned digital assets in their life because they're not on the committee of jurisdiction. They've never co-sponsored a bill. They've never shown any interest in it. And so those are the members that are easily manipulated from the senator and able to support her agenda.
All right, we're going to try to do a line list for our audience and give you guys kind of a rundown, much like what has been done with, with Standard Crypto in terms of who the lawmakers are. Because I feel like if we start calling these people out, especially in Capitol Hill, at a time right now when a lot of constituents are starting to consider how they're going to vote next year, this might be a good time to really kind of unveil the mask. I want to go into your opinion on the issue with ETFs. Now, I know ETFs obviously more of a financial instrument, but your opinion on whether or not this will cause, if we do see an ETF approval with BlackRock and many others that have filed, this was of course, talking about Gary Gensler, talking for the first time really about the number of filings on Bitcoin that's in front of the commission, seems to be leaning slightly on the positive side, I guess, if you can say positive with Gensler in the same sentence. But my question to you, will this affect regulation? If we were to get an ETF approval, how do you feel DC would respond to something like that?
Oh, absolutely. I think what it does is people start to pay attention. I always say that there's really two ways to drive regulation on digital assets or Bitcoin specifically on Capitol Hill. It's either you have a massive market failure. You've got a Sam Bankman-Fried who is going to come in and sway everyone's position to go to one side. Or the counter side of that, price goes up. And I think what everyone's excited about an ETF is that the price is likely to go up, especially with these institutional investors getting involved. And so when you see a headline tying Bitcoin to BlackRock, to Fidelity, to ARK, that piques the interest of members of Capitol Hill, those blank slate members who go, I wasn't paying attention to this before, but man, Bitcoin's at 60,000, it's at 70,000, it's at 80,000. My kids are paying attention to it. My staffers are paying attention to it. And my constituents are paying attention to it. So I better pay attention to this. And what's going on here? And I'm going to start asking questions. And that's where they come to us at the chamber and other advocates in DC to help answer those questions and fill them in on the potential of this. So that's where I think a spot Bitcoin ETF approval truly changes the regulatory game, because it starts to pique interest. It starts to have people asking questions, because I think it's likely to correspond to a price going up.
Well, yeah, listen, if you get Wall Street involved, especially in digital assets, and that would be bringing Wall Street right to the front table. I mean, let's be honest, most of these congressmen and lawmakers, their front pockets are filled mostly by Wall Street bankers. So let's just be honest. Yeah. It's going to move the needle for sure.
Yeah, and it'll definitely move the needle. And I hate simplifying it into, it's just market failure or price going up, but that's what it is. I think people expect through the advocacy and educate that these members of Congress will become technical experts, and they'll be coders and they'll be developers and they'll be getting in the weeds of what blockchain technology is. That's not how it works. We've got to take a step back and remember who we're talking about here. These are many people over the age of 70 and 80 and 90 even, who will never understand the technical intricacies of this technology. They do understand asset is at X price, and now asset has gone parabolic, is at X price, and there are headlines about it. So I'm going to start paying attention. And so you have to break it down to its simplest form, and that's what happens here. And that's what I think can lead to those questions, that piqued interest if a spot Bitcoin ETF is to get approved.
Yeah. What do you make of this? Stablecoins now, this of course coming from Michael Barr, talking from the Fed, talking about, hey, we need stablecoin regulation. This is coming from the Federal Reserve. And when you look at the way that stablecoin regulation is currently in front of the House, obviously Patrick McHenry's office, what's your percentage of us seeing some regulation, especially on stablecoins, in this cycle right now in terms of a legislative standpoint?
This may seem like a cop-out, but I'm going to say 50-50. And I would say that I have gone from 0 to 15% to 50%, which I
Oh,
think that
okay.
context is. I think that context is important. Um, One, I'm glad to see Mr. Barr say that coming from the Federal Reserve. I think it's somewhat ironic because I think the Federal Reserve has been somewhat of a blocker to this stablecoin legislation moving forward. There is a comprehensive and what I view as a bipartisan bill, as you mentioned, Paul, in front of the House Financial Services Committee right now. It has moved through committee, but it didn't receive overwhelming bipartisan support that
Mm-hmm.
we had expected. The reason it didn't receive that overwhelming bipartisan support is because at the 11th hour, the Federal Reserve came in and go, Democrats, please do not support this because it does not give us enough supervisory and enforcement power over some of the non-bank issuers of stablecoins.
Right.
Because in the way the legislation is written right now, some of those state banking regulators would still have that supervisory and enforcement power. And the Fed
Mm-hmm.
said, we want it all. We want the whole pie. And so I think it's a little bit ironic that Mr. Barr is saying, hey, this needs to be regulated when they've been somewhat of a blocker to getting that,
Yeah.
that bipartisan solution that will give them the power to regulate. But I think it's optimistic, or I'm optimistic that this bill is moving forward. You've got a Patrick McHenry as a chairman of the House Financial Services Committee, who's clearly very influential and was the acting speaker for the last 3 weeks. He is
Right.
dedicated to moving this bill forward. And so that's why I'm optimistic.
Yeah, I was looking at the article here. This really surprised me, the statement. So the Federal Reserve has strong interest in ensuring that any stablecoin offering operated within an appropriate federal prudential oversight framework so they do not threaten financial stability or a payment system integrity. And I almost wonder, is there something in terms of context behind that? Because I look at that and I think, do they have a CBDC in mind here? Are they really talking about USDC? Are they talking about other forms of stablecoins coming to market? I'm curious as to why all of a sudden a little bit of a flip on, especially from the Fed. Do you have any commentary you can add to that?
I think if you're in the shoes of the Fed right now, you've been studying a CBDC not very quietly for a while now. You
Yep.
watch that there are over 100 other jurisdictions that are moving forward with research development plans, with pilot programs, and you're saying we need to do something. But you also see where the market's at, and you see that the market has gone into this new innovation called stablecoins. And you're curious where you fall in as a regulator.
Right.
And you could either view that as a threat, stablecoins are a threat to a CBDC in the current US monetary system, or you could see it as a complement. And so I think the Fed right now is really confused on where they go and what the future holds for the US monetary system. Do we allow this new innovation to flourish? And if so, are we comfortable with not all of them being under the regulatory purview of the Fed? And I don't think they are. I think that if you're going to issue a stablecoin now, tomorrow, or the next few years, the Fed wants you to be a bank, and they want to
Hmm.
regulate you like a bank because that's what they're safe. That's what they feel safe with. That's what they're used to. But then you've got this CBDC aspect, and I don't know if right now the Fed thinks that both of those things can survive together. I think they're
Yeah.
trying to figure that out, and that's why some of the statements are pretty interesting that have come out recently.
My theory is that there's some sort of connection to the EU because Christine Lagarde, of course, released in fact, they even said months ago that October would be the date in which the digital euro would happen, and now it's going live. So with that type of alliance, especially with what the US has with the EU, is there kind of a very interesting analysis here of what's happening in Europe versus what's happening obviously here in the US, where we seem to be losing our way, don't have regulation, don't have a MiCA-like bill in place. None
Yep.
of that is really on track. So very interesting timing here. I want to leap over to the courts. And of course, when I talk about the courts, of course, I have to bring up my friend John Deaton. He had a statement right here. Obviously, the 17th of January is an important date. This is for the oral arguments in the Coinbase case. If we do see a possible court, I won't say decision, but a potential of them dismissing this case in January, this is another major potential loss for the SEC. How
Yep.
does that affect? I mean, because I feel like we've already had a bunch of cases that have already given the SEC a black eye, and I don't feel like that has been a big advantage on moving legislation and getting our lawmakers ahead of the game of understanding what's happening. Do you feel like this one would make any difference in Capitol Hill?
I do. And as I mentioned earlier, I probably need to correct myself. I mentioned that there are two things that really can drive momentum in Capitol Hill, and it's price go up and market failure. The third is the
Yep.
courts.
Mm-hmm.
The courts truly have influence on what is the perception of Capitol Hill, of digital assets, and how the SEC is doing. I think if you're going to take anything away from past precedent, and this will lead me to my analysis of the Coinbase case. If you look at the decision from Judge Torres in the XRP case, it was the first time that there were members of Congress who said, we gave the SEC power and authority to kind of run with regulation of this industry. Gary Gensler, you have carte blanche. You say that every digital asset security will believe you and will trust you, and from the Democratic side of the aisle.
Yeah.
And we'll let you go with it. When the XRP decision came out, it was the first time that you had Democrats in the House Financial Services Committee and the Senate Banking Committee say, oh, wait a second, I have questions. Like we gave you, the opportunity to run with this. You said every asset is a security, and we're going to listen to you, even though we've heard complaints from constituents and from the market. And now the courts are calling you into question, which does not happen very often, where a federal court will go against a federal agency. And so I think if Coinbase were to come out and not in favor of the SEC, and the court was going to grant that motion to dismiss, the questions will rain from both sides of the aisle on Capitol Hill. And I think Gary Gensler will be called in immediately to testify on what is going wrong. And you won't only see questions from Republicans and that oversight function from Republicans, but Democrats will immediately call into question whether the SEC has it right, whether there needs to be more momentum to get a legislative fix, and for the Congress to step in and draw those jurisdictional lines like we've been calling for. That's where I think this could have a huge influence on what Capitol Hill does.
So there's some big decisions right now, ETFs, the courts, what we'll see potentially here within even some of the structural things, even with what's happening with SBF and his court case, that could start to line up some very interesting things early next year. I want to reference a video that we did yesterday. This was with Faryar Shahzad, who is the chief policy officer over at Coinbase. And his statement to me in that video that we did, if you guys haven't watched that video, go back and check it out. We went into a lot of these things, but he made a statement I thought was interesting, and that is that Gensler, he felt like his time was up by the end of next year. Now, granted, that's still a year early for his full cycle. Do you feel like Gensler could be at risk? Is he going to have too much political baggage on top of him by that time? What's your thought?
It depends on how those court cases come out. It depends on if he moves forward with a spot Bitcoin ETF. I think a lot of that drives that narrative into what his reputation will be in Washington and with the administration. However, and this is not to counter what was said in that video at all, but I will say that Gary Gensler is very popular in the administration right now because he has allied himself with Senator Warren. Yeah. And if you look at the way that the financial regulatory system is led through the White House, Senator Warren has positioned herself and her former staff members to really be in places of power. And Gary Gensler has done an incredible job at aligning himself with Senator Warren. And when there are bills come out, like the market structure bill that's moving through the FIT for the 21st Century Act, that's moving through House Financial Services, we know for a fact that that bill is not going to come up in Senate banking because Elizabeth Warren and Gary Gensler went to her and said, this bill limits my power and I don't want that. And so even though that, he may be put to the fire, and there are some events that I think will call into question his reputation and the way that he is regulating this industry and whether he should be chairman of the SEC after next year, he has aligned himself with some very powerful people in the administration that I think it makes it hard to see his removal unless it's under his own power.
Interesting. Just as a reminder, guys, we have 951 days left of Mr. Gensler if he goes to his full on that's the Gensler clock right there. This is going to be interesting for sure. I don't know. it's a good, I mean, it's a good analysis because sometimes you have to prepare yourself for the markets just to understand that, hey, Gensler may be here. Maybe he gives us an ETF. Maybe he's going to lighten up a little bit. But with everything I'm seeing right now from the crypto army, mostly led by Warren, you look at, Senator Loomis. Let's talk about that. The flip, or it feels like a flip completely on digital assets in her position, along with what we've seen here, obviously with a slowdown in the House. I'm just a little concerned as to how this is going to play out going forward. Let me ask you this. Last question to you, Cody, is when you have a Lummis that comes in and says, maybe there's a different point here, which do you feel like there are people in Congress right now that are intentionally, outside of the Army, intentionally trying to subvert what's happening in the House committees right now, especially around these regulation positions?
Yes and no. I think intentionally people are trying to move the conversation away from digital asset legislation because I think, again, it's that argument that this shouldn't exist. And by regulating it, we provide it legitimacy. And I think that's mostly the Army's perspective. I also think there are people who are saying, whoa, 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 I don't understand this and I'm not educated. And I think this is a large group who is saying, before we move forward with legislation, can we study this? Can we have more briefings? And so I think that is viewed by there's a lot of people in the House who are taking that angle, but it is viewed by many in the public that, hey, we're trying to thwart or to subvert, as you said, those legislative efforts. However, I will say that I think if you look at the influential players that were behind some of the House efforts, if you look at the momentum that those bills have had moving through committees in the end of July, I think it is very, very hard to ignore what is happening. And I think that the more and more constituents, Americans, raise that they are not only interested in this technology, but they're experimenting with this technology, that they are using this assets, and they call their members of Congress, who, again, those blank slate members I mentioned who are like, I've never heard of crypto. If you're in one of those seats and you look up your member and you say, wow, you've never commented on crypto, call them, call their staffer, tell them you're interested, because that is the best way to get them motivated. And we're starting to see that momentum shift in the House. It's happening more with younger members. I always like to say, I don't think this issue is partisan, even though some of the most vocal critics happen to be on the Democratic side of the aisle. I think this is a generational issue. And so call your member of Congress if you haven't seen them speak on it, and tell them to speak up and tell them to get educated and to get in line with that these bills are moving forward and we're going to regulate this industry soon.
Yeah, for sure. Just as a reminder, you guys can do that. Hit standwithcrypto.org. This is Coinbase's effort, but the point is you can call your congressman. You put in your own zip code, it's going to bring it up. Gives you a little AI script to talk about, so anybody can do it. I agree with you, Cody. Cody, it's been great having you on. If you guys want to find Cody, catch him on Twitter right there at Cody Carbone DC, and check him out over there. Thanks so much for stopping in today. We appreciate it.
Thanks so much for having me. This was awesome. Thanks, Paul.
Excellent. All right, so you guys might be listening in over on the podcast side of things. Jump over here to the YouTube channel. Get subscribed because you need to get in on the alpha. We do a ton of project analysis. We do TA. We'll dive in deep. We get into regulation. We look at all sorts of things when it comes to blockchain, crypto, and really kind of the future of technology as all this plays out. If you guys want to catch me on X, it's @PaulBaron. We'll catch you next time right here on TechPath.